They said the day arrived exactly when it should have. Late summer, when the light softens and even the air seems to forgive old mistakes. The tide rolled in on schedule. The bells chimed on cue. Every guest stepped into the courtyard believing they had come to witness a beginning. Clean, precise, and perfectly timed. Charleston wore its best face that afternoon. White columns stood like promises. Spanish moss drifted lazily, as if the past itself had decided to be gentle. Champagne glasses caught the sun and scattered it into small, glittering certainties. This was the kind of wedding people would remember fondly years later. The kind they would measure others against and say, this is how it's done. And in the center of it all stood the bride. Aaliyah Monroe did not rush. She never had. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who understood history, not as nostalgia, but as a series of decisions that echo long after the music fades. Her gown fell around her like a whispered secret, silk and restraint, nothing excessive, nothing borrowed. When she smiled, it wasn't the kind that begged for approval. It was the kind that invited belief. People believed. They believed because she looked radiant in the way old paintings are radiant, composed, luminous, unhurried by the noise of the present. They believed because the groom looked so certain, so satisfied with the symmetry of it all. And they believed because weddings encourage faith. They ask us, gently but firmly, to suspend our doubts. Ryan Caldwell stood beside her, tall and polished, the future already mapped behind his eyes. He squeezed her hand at just the right moments, laughed when laughter was required, leaned in as if intimacy were a practiced art. To anyone watching, this was chemistry. This was success finding its mirror. What no one noticed, what no one could have noticed, was the weight Aaliyah carried beneath the calm. Not dread, not fear, something colder, clearer. Timing, she knew, was not about clocks or calendars. It was about leverage, about who spoke first and who listened, about when silence did more damage than truth ever could. The band struck a familiar melody, and the guests exhaled together. Phones were raised discreetly. Somewhere, a distant cousin whispered, "They're perfect." Somewhere else, a friend thought, "I want this one day." Aaliyah lifted her chin and stepped forward into the light, and the illusion held. Because that is the most dangerous thing about perfect timing. It convinces everyone that nothing else is possible, that what they are seeing is the whole story, that beginnings cannot also be endings in disguise. She walked down the aisle with grace, with intention, with a serenity so complete it bordered on sacred. And if you watched closely, if you listened beyond the vows and the applause, you might have sensed it. A stillness too deliberate to be innocent. This was not a story about love arriving late or leaving early. This was a story about love arriving exactly when it was meant to, and what happens when someone decides not to waste that moment. If this opening made you pause, if it stirred a question or a feeling you can't quite name, stay with the story. Let it unfold. And if you find yourself wanting to understand what comes next, or to share what you think timing really means, feel free to leave a thought behind and follow along as the illusion begins to crack. Aaliyah Monroe had learned, long before silk and vows entered her life, how easily the world mistook quiet for permission. She was raised in rooms where voices were measured, not raised, where listening carried more power than interruption. Her grandmother used to say that history did not favor the loud, only the precise. Aaliyah took that lesson with her into every space she entered, moving through institutions and expectations with a patience that unsettled people who mistook urgency for importance. She had never been small, not in mind, not in spirit, only in the way she conserved herself. As a cultural historian and acquisitions director, she spent her days negotiating with donors, collectors, and curators who believed ownership was the same as understanding. She learned how to smile while refusing, how to ask questions that sounded gentle but opened locked doors. Her work was about preservation, about protecting meaning from erosion. It required discipline, it required restraint, and it required the ability to see long arcs where others saw moments. That was how she loved too. Ryan once told her that what he admired most was her calm. He said it like a compliment, but she had heard the undertone even then. Calm as in manageable. Calm as in unlikely to disrupt. He loved that she didn't need to dominate a room to command it. He loved that she made space. What he never asked was why she made that space, or what she would do if someone mistook it for emptiness. On the morning of the wedding, as attendants fluttered around her with pins and perfume in breathless admiration, Aaliyah stood alone by a tall window and watched the city breathe. Charleston moved slowly, deliberately, as if it had learned the value of endurance. She liked that about the place. It reminded her that survival did not require spectacle. She thought briefly of the girl she had been at 22, idealistic, certain that love alone could carry the weight of compromise. That girl believed honesty was enough, that if you gave someone your trust, they would feel its gravity and protect it. She smiled at the memory without bitterness. Growth, after all, was not betrayal of the past. It was an answer to it. When she finally turned from the window, she caught her reflection. The woman looking back at her was composed, luminous, undeniably present. There was no fear in her eyes. There was resolve. The kind that forms quietly, layer by layer, until it becomes unmovable. Aaliyah adjusted the delicate chain at her neck, her grandmother's, worn thin by decades of skin and story. It grounded her, reminded her that she came from women who endured, who adapted, who understood that dignity was not granted but maintained. Outside, laughter drifted in waves. Inside, something settled. She knew the assumptions being made about her that day, that she was lucky, that she was chosen, that she had won some unspoken prize. She had heard versions of it all her life, disguised as praise. What none of them understood was that Aaliyah Monroe had never waited to be chosen. She stepped away from the mirror and toward the door, carrying herself with the same unhurried grace she brought to every decisive moment. The world would see a bride walking toward her future. What it could not yet see was the full measure of the woman beneath the gown, a woman who understood scale, consequence, and timing, and who had never, not once, mistaken love for surrender. Ryan Caldwell had built his life on the quiet assurance that he was always a step ahead. It wasn't arrogance, at least not in the way people imagine it. He didn't boast. He didn't bluster. His confidence lived in smaller, subtler places, in the way he finished other people's sentences, in the way he listened just long enough to extract what he needed, in the way he smiled as if outcomes naturally bent toward him. Control to Ryan was proof of intelligence. If he could manage a room, a deal, a person, then surely he understood them. He had learned this early, in college seminar rooms, in glass-walled offices, in conversations where the sharpest voice was not the loudest, but the most strategic. He watched how power moved and decided he would never be surprised by it. Surprises, he believed, were for people who failed to prepare. That belief carried him far. By the time he met Aaliyah, Ryan was already practiced at success. He knew how to speak ambition fluently, how to promise futures without committing to details. He loved the idea of partnership, so long as it fit neatly into the architecture of his plans. Marriage to him was not a surrender of freedom, but a refinement of it, a way to stabilize the image, strengthen the narrative, polish the edges. And Aaliyah fit beautifully into that picture. She was everything his world admired, intelligent without being threatening, elegant without excess, accomplished without noise. She didn't compete for attention. She didn't need to. Ryan told himself this was compatibility. He told himself that her quiet was a sign of trust, that her restraint meant she felt safe enough not to push. What he failed to consider was that restraint can also be a form of observation. On the day of the wedding, Ryan moved through the hours with effortless precision. He greeted guests with warmth, calibrated just right. He accepted congratulations like confirmations of a thesis long proven. He felt the subtle thrill of alignment, the sense that life, finally, was obeying the logic he had always imposed upon it. Standing at the altar, he looked at Aaliyah and felt satisfaction more than wonder. Satisfaction that he had chosen well. Satisfaction that the woman beside him reflected stability, depth, and taste. Satisfaction that the future he imagined had taken shape exactly as planned. He did not notice how carefully she studied him. Ryan believed he understood people because he understood incentives. He believed loyalty could be managed, desire compartmentalized, consequences delayed. He believed that as long as he remained composed, no variable could truly escape him. It never occurred to him that intelligence without humility eventually mistakes blindness for confidence. As he slipped the ring onto Aaliyah's finger, he felt the solid reassurance of completion. Another milestone reached, another box checked. He thought of the life unfolding ahead, travel, influence, calculated risks taken quietly and corrected when necessary. He thought he was standing at the beginning of something permanent. What Ryan did not understand was that control is not wisdom, and certainty is not foresight. He had spent his life mastering the art of steering outcomes without ever asking who, exactly, was watching from the other side of the wheel. He smiled for the cameras, kissed his bride, and stepped forward into applause, utterly convinced that he was the author of the moment. And that conviction, so polished and so unchallenged, was the most dangerous thing about him. Belief is a curious thing. It does not require proof, only a setting beautiful enough to quiet doubt. That afternoon, the estate breathed with anticipation. White chairs aligned like well-kept promises. The aisle, pale and immaculate, stretched forward as if it had been waiting all its life for this procession. Guests settled into their seats with the soft rustle of fabric and expectation, the sound of 100 small certainties taking shape at once. They believed in this wedding because it looked the way belief is supposed to look. Sunlight filtered through live oaks and scattered itself across polished stone. A string quartet coaxed tenderness from familiar melodies, each note arriving precisely where it should. Programs were printed on thick, elegant paper. Names were spelled correctly. Everything was considered. Everything made sense. When Aaliyah appeared at the far end of the aisle, a hush fell, instinctive, reverent. She moved with a grace that did not ask for attention, but commanded it all the same. Her gown was restrained, architectural in its simplicity, designed not to overwhelm, but to endure. It did not wear her. She carried it. Ryan waited at the front, posture relaxed, expression warm. He looked like a man stepping into a future he had rehearsed thoroughly. When their eyes met, he smiled with confidence, assured, satisfied, certain that this moment confirmed everything he believed about himself and the life he was building. The officiant spoke of partnership and purpose, of choosing each other again and again. The words drifted easily across the crowd, landing softly in receptive hearts. Parents dabbed at their eyes. Friends leaned closer. Somewhere in the back, someone whispered, "This is real." And it was, just not in the way they thought. Aaliyah listened to the vows with an attentiveness that bordered on ceremonial. She did not rush them. She did not rush herself. Each word passed through her like a bell tolling, clear, resonant, irrevocable. She repeated her own vows with steady cadence, her voice neither trembling nor triumphant, but precise. Anyone watching would have seen sincerity, and sincerity, after all, is often indistinguishable from resolve. When Ryan spoke, he spoke well. He always did. His promises were expansive, his tone assured. He spoke of building, of standing together, of futures imagined in plural. He meant what he said in the way he meant all things, confident that meaning could be shaped later, should it require adjustment. They exchanged rings to applause that swelled and spilled into joy. The kiss was met with cheers, cameras flashed. The moment sealed itself into memory before anyone had time to question it. Afterward, the celebration unfolded like a carefully composed symphony. Laughter rose and fell. Glasses clinked. Old stories were retold with affectionate exaggeration. Strangers became witnesses. Witnesses became believers. Aaliyah danced. She laughed at the right moments. She accepted embraces and congratulations with warmth that felt genuine because it was, just not for the reasons anyone assumed. She watched faces glow with happiness and felt, beneath it all, a stillness so complete it surprised even her. This was the power of a shared illusion. Once enough people believe in something, it gains weight. It becomes difficult to question, almost sacred, and that was precisely why it mattered. As twilight deepened and the last song lingered in the warm air, the guests carried the story home with them. A flawless wedding, a perfect match, a future blessed by beauty and intention. They left convinced they had witnessed a beginning. None of them realized they had also witnessed the final moment before the truth, patiently waiting its turn, began to move. 4 days before the wedding, the world was still quiet. It was the kind of afternoon that carried no warning, no sharp edges, no sense of approaching fracture. The sky hung low and pale, as if conserving its color for a better occasion. Aaliyah parked outside Ryan's condo with the unhurried ease of routine, a slim folder of documents resting on the passenger seat beside her. Final confirmations, travel details, the small, ordinary paper trail of a life about to change. She let herself in with the spare key he had given her months ago, back when trust felt simple and shared space felt inevitable. The apartment smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and something warmer beneath it, coffee maybe, or habit. It was a space that reflected Ryan well, minimal, controlled, everything in its place. A place that suggested nothing was ever left unattended. She was not meant to stay long, just a quick drop-off. She set her bag down, crossed the living room, and placed the folder neatly on the kitchen counter. That was when the light caught her eye. Ryan's laptop sat open on the island, the screen dim but awake, as if waiting. He was usually careful, almost ritualistic, about closing it, locking it, keeping his professional world sealed tight. The sight of it exposed struck her as strange, but not yet alarming. She turned away, already reaching for her phone, when the screen brightened. A new message appeared. It was not the full email, only a preview, just enough to exist, just enough to speak. A name surfaced first, unfamiliar but not anonymous. Then a line of text, casually devastating in its intimacy. I know the wedding is happening, but you promised. Lisbon next month. I've already booked the place. She won't ever know. The room seemed to tilt, subtly at first, then all at once. Aaliyah stood very still, the air thick in her chest. The folder on the counter suddenly heavier than it had any right to be. She did not touch the computer. She did not scroll. She did not need to. The message had already done its work with surgical precision. This was not carelessness. This was not confusion. This was intention. She recognized the difference immediately. Years spent reading archives, decoding correspondence, understanding what people reveal when they think they are safe. It had trained her for moments like this. Plans leave a different trace than mistakes. Promises do not disguise themselves as accidents. She stood there, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator, the distant murmur of traffic outside. She felt the initial wave rise. Heat, disbelief, a sharp, instinctive urge to shatter something just to prove that the moment was real. She imagined calling him, calling her mother, calling off everything with a single sentence spoken too quickly to take back. The relief of it tempted her. But relief, she knew, was not resolution. It was escape. She closed her eyes and breathed until the world steadied. When she opened them again, the room looked the same, but she did not. Something fundamental had shifted, quietly, irrevocably. The story she thought she was living had ended, and another had begun in its place. Aaliyah picked up the folder, straightened it, and slid it back into her bag. She reached out then, not to the laptop but to the lid, and closed it gently, as one might close a book whose ending had already been spoiled. When she left the apartment, she locked the door behind her. Outside, the afternoon continued, indifferent and serene. People passed her on the sidewalk, unaware that a future had just collapsed and reassembled itself inside her chest. The wedding was still 4 days away. The dresses were still pressed. The vows were still written. And yet, everything had been rewritten. Not in haste, not in anger, but in clarity. From that moment on, nothing would happen by accident again. That night, the city softened. Charleston held its breath the way it often did at dusk, when the heat loosened its grip and the streets began to glow rather than glare. Aaliyah walked without destination, her heels abandoned in her hand, the cool stone of the sidewalk grounding her with each step. She let the sounds pass through her, the clink of cutlery from open windows, the low laughter of strangers, the distant rhythm of water meeting shore. It would have been so easy to disappear into that evening. She sat on a bench near the harbor and watched the sky surrender its blue, layer by layer, to something gentler. Boats rocked in quiet agreement. The world, it seemed, was perfectly content to keep moving without explanation. She envied it. For the first time since the message appeared on that screen, the urge to leave rose with a dangerous sweetness. Not to confront, not to correct, just to go. To cancel the wedding with a dignified sentence. To tell her mother she needed time. To step out of the narrative before it hardened around her like wet cement. She imagined the relief in vivid detail. The way her shoulders would finally drop. The way the constant vigilance would dissolve. She imagined waking the next morning without a schedule, without an audience, without the obligation to be gracious in the face of betrayal. She imagined freedom arriving quietly, without spectacle. And for a moment, she wanted it. She thought of her grandmother then, not as memory, but as presence. Of the way she used to pause before making difficult decisions, as if consulting something older than instinct. Leaving is not the same as choosing, she used to say, and silence can either protect you or erase you. Aaliyah pressed her palms together and closed her eyes. If she walked away now, the story would be written for her. The anxious bride, the woman who panicked, the one who couldn't handle the pressure, the commitment, the moment. Ryan would be disappointed, embarrassed, but intact. He would explain, he would contextualize, he would survive. She knew this because she had seen it before, in different forms, different men, different rooms. Power did not collapse simply because it was challenged. It rearranged itself. Her phone buzzed softly in her hand. A message from her mother. Nothing urgent, just a reminder about the rehearsal schedule, a heart emoji punctuating the end. Aaliyah smiled despite herself. She imagined her mother's face if she called right now, voice trembling, truth spilling out too fast to shape. The questions that would follow, the worry, the sense of failure that would settle in places it did not belong. She was not afraid of being alone. She was afraid of being reduced. Aaliyah opened her eyes and looked at the water again. It moved with patience, never asking permission to take up space, never apologizing for its reach. It did not retreat simply because something stood in its way. It waited. It learned the shape of resistance, and then it changed the shoreline. The realization arrived without drama, but it carried weight. Walking away would end her discomfort. Staying on her terms, would end the illusion. She rose from the bench and slipped her shoes back on, the familiar click against stone sounding steadier now. The grief was still there, but it had shifted. Less a wound, more a line drawn with purpose. She did not feel cruel. She did not feel vengeful. She felt resolved. By the time she reached her car, the decision had settled fully into her bones. She would not vanish quietly. She would not allow someone else to define the moment of collapse. The wedding would proceed. The smiles would hold. The timing would be exact. And when she finally walked away, it would not be in retreat but in full view, carrying with her not just dignity, but the certainty that she had chosen herself without becoming small to do it. The morning after the harbor, Aaliyah woke before the sun. The house was still, the kind of stillness that usually feels holy, but now it felt intentional, like the world was waiting to see what she would do with her silence. She lay in bed for a long moment, staring at the faint outline of curtains, listening to her own breath as if it belonged to someone else. There was a version of herself, tender, younger, still willing to believe that love could be saved by explanation, who might have called Ryan right then, who might have demanded answers, begged for the truth, accepted half apologies wrapped in charm. That version would have tried to repair what had already been broken. Aaliyah did not move toward repair. She moved toward clarity. In the bathroom mirror, she studied her face with the careful attention she usually reserved for artifacts, things that had survived time and pressure and still held their meaning. Her eyes were steady, not hardened, not empty, just awake. She brushed her hair slowly, as if each stroke was a small act of order in a world that had tilted. Then she opened her calendar. The next 4 days were mapped in flawless detail. Rehearsal, dinner, fittings, final confirmations with vendors. The kind of schedule that required faith, the kind that assumed nothing would change. It struck her then how much modern romance relied on logistics. How many love stories were built not on vows, but on deposits. Aaliyah stared at the list until it stopped looking like a celebration and started looking like a stage. She could cancel. She could send the polite messages, absorb the frantic replies, endure the soft pity hiding behind every, "Are you okay?" She could stand in the ruins of her own plans while Ryan stepped cleanly away, brushing ash from his suit as if the fire had been accidental. Or she could let the trap close, not because she was hungry for revenge, not because she wanted to watch him suffer, but because she understood something most people refuse to admit. Betrayal was not merely personal, it was strategic. It was an attempt to take something, trust, money, reputation, stability, and leave the other person holding the consequences. Ryan had not only broken her heart, he had attempted to control the narrative of her life. And Aaliyah had spent too many years watching history misname women's pain. She imagined the wedding day, her guests, her family, the way people would look at her afterward. She imagined Ryan's polished sorrow if she canceled, his gentle voice, his wounded confusion, the soft, public performance of a man who had been blindsided. She knew how easily people believed men like him. Aaliyah's phone buzzed again. A text from Ryan. A heart. A simple, "Can't believe we're almost there." The casual sweetness of it made something in her chest tighten, not with longing, but with astonishment. He could write that. He could send it while a second life waited in the shadows. In that moment, her decision solidified into something almost calm. She would not confront him now. She would not give him the chance to prepare. She would not offer him the dignity of an early warning. She stood at the kitchen counter and began to write a list, not of accusations, not of emotions, but of steps. The kind of list she made for exhibitions and acquisitions. Evidence, documentation, timelines, points of contact. She wrote as if she were curating a truth that needed to survive scrutiny. The cruelty of it was not her goal. The certainty of it was. Aaliyah made coffee and watched the steam rise. She did not cry. Tears would come later, perhaps, when the body finally understood what the mind had already accepted. For now, she needed to be precise. She needed to be unshakable. She heard her grandmother's voice again, soft as fabric. Never give away the moment you can still hold. Aaliyah looked out the window at the street beginning to wake, sunlight inching across the pavement like a slow decision. Somewhere across town, vendors were preparing flowers, polishing glassware, pressing linens. The world was building her a fairy tale. She would let it, because once the trap closed, Ryan would have nowhere to hide, no story to twist, no easy exit wrapped in charm. He would have to face what he had done, not in private, not in the comfort of control, but at the peak of his own celebration, when he was most confident that everything belonged to him. Aaliyah took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth steady her. Then she picked up her phone and typed back a reply, perfectly simple. "Me neither. I'll see you soon." It was not a lie. It was a promise, just not the one he thought. In the days that followed, Aaliyah became an expert in normal. She smiled when the florist arrived with samples of ivory roses and blush peonies. She nodded over seating charts and menu tastings. She answered questions about linen shades and candle heights as if the choices mattered more than the truth pressing against her ribs. Every vendor saw a bride in control, polished, gracious, slightly tired in the way all brides are tired. No one saw the second life running beneath the first. At night, when the calls stopped and the house finally exhaled, Aaliyah sat at her desk with a glass of water, in the kind of focus that once won her scholarship interviews and museum board approvals. She did not drink wine. She did not allow herself the soft blur of comfort. She needed clarity the way some people needed prayer. Her laptop glow illuminated a different world. Quiet emails, discreet appointments, files that could change a future with the click of a button. The attorney she contacted did not advertise. She was recommended through a chain of women who understood discretion the way others understood devotion, instinctively, without needing explanation. Her name was Marisol Grant, based in Atlanta, the kind of lawyer who did not waste words or tolerate fantasies. When Aaliyah first heard her voice, low, even, precise, it felt like stepping into a room where the air had already been cleared. They spoke late one evening, after Aaliyah had returned from the rehearsal dinner and slipped out of her dress as if removing a costume. "You're not calling to punish him," Marisol said, more observation than question. Aaliyah stared at the dark window above her desk. "I'm calling to preserve myself." There was a pause on the line, a quiet acknowledgement. "Then we move cleanly." The word sounded almost romantic in its own way, like the promise of a sharp ending instead of a long bleed. Marisol asked for facts, not feelings. Timelines, documents, asset lists. Aaliyah provided them with the steadiness of someone who had trained her whole life to remember details that others dismissed. She remembered the down payment conversations, the accounts opened temporarily, the papers Ryan signed without reading because he trusted his own charm more than fine print. "Your biggest advantage," Marisol said, "is that you know now, before the merging becomes permanent." Aaliyah did not correct her. She did not say, "My biggest advantage is that he thinks I don't know." She held that truth close, like a blade hidden in silk. Somewhere between midnight and 2 a.m., Aaliyah began compiling what Marisol called a quiet record. Screenshots, email headers, travel receipts. Aaliyah had not opened the laptop that day in Ryan's condo, but she had memorized enough to start. Names, dates, destinations. She checked their shared calendar and found what she expected. Certain entries missing, certain days suspiciously blank. Blank space, she learned, was rarely empty. It was often intentional. She could have been hurt by the precision of his planning. Instead, she matched it. The work was not dramatic. It was not cinematic. It was administrative in the way survival often is. Aaliyah moved money into separate holdings that were already hers. Inheritance accounts, personal investments, ensuring they were documented, protected, untouchable. She reviewed joint accounts and saw the quiet truth she had suspected. She had paid more than she realized, not because she was naive, but because she believed partnership meant contribution. She understood now that he had mistaken her generosity for softness. The wedding, meanwhile, continued to gather momentum. Her mother called with excitement in her voice. Her friends sent messages full of heart emojis and countdowns. Aaliyah replied to everything. She delivered the right warmth, the right humor, the right gratitude. She hugged Ryan's relatives at brunch and accepted their compliments like confetti. At times, in the middle of all that brightness, grief would rise unexpectedly, like a tide slipping in beneath a door. She would catch it in her throat when someone said, "You two are perfect." She would feel it in her chest when her grandmother squeezed her hand and whispered, "You look like joy, baby." Aaliyah never corrected her. It was not her grandmother's burden to carry. Instead, she would step into a bathroom, lock the door, breathe slowly, and remind herself, this is not the moment to fall apart. One night, Ryan called her from his condo, voice light with anticipation. I can't stop thinking about us, he said. Like, finally, it's happening. Aaliyah held the phone to her ear and listened to his confidence, the way he spoke as if the future belonged to him by default. She imagined the other message, Lisbon, already booked, already promised, sitting like a second heartbeat behind his words. How romantic, she said softly, and the sentence tasted like iron and honey. When she hung up, she stared at the dark screen of her laptop until it reflected her face back at her. Not broken, not fragile, not small. Aaliyah closed her eyes and let herself feel one clean moment of sorrow, quick and sharp, like the sting of cold air. Then she opened them again and returned to her checklist. Marisol's last email that night was brief. Everything will be ready when you are. Aaliyah reread it twice. Ready was a strange word. It implied willingness. It implied peace. She was not at peace. Not yet, but she was prepared. And in a world where men like Ryan mistook control for intelligence, preparation was its own quiet form of power, one that did not need applause, only timing. When the last guest finally drifted away and the estate lights dimmed into a softer glow, Ryan exhaled as if he had just completed a performance he'd been rehearsing for months. "We did it," he murmured against Aaliyah's hair, his voice warm with triumph and champagne. "Perfect, right?" Perfect. The word moved through her like silk drawn over steel. She let her smile linger, the kind of smile that allowed others to rest in their assumptions. Around them, the remnants of celebration still shimmered, empty glasses catching candlelight, petals bruised on the dance floor, the faint echo of music clinging to the night air. The whole world smelled of flowers and sugar and the sweet exhaustion of being admired. They left Charleston before dawn. Aaliyah sat beside Ryan in the back of the car, watching the city slip into shadow behind them. She could feel the weight of her ring on her finger like a punctuation mark. Ryan held her hand with possessive tenderness, tracing slow circles as he talked about the next 2 weeks, the way men talk about things they believe they own. "No phones," he said, pleased with the idea, as if disconnection were a luxury he had invented. "No distractions, just you and me." Aaliyah nodded at the right moments. She offered small sounds of agreement. She let him build the fantasy aloud while she watched the road unwind into morning. At the airport, Ryan moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to priority lines and unspoken privileges. Staff smiled. Strangers stepped aside. He used the new title, "My Wife," as if it were a badge. It looked good on him, he thought. It made him look settled. It made him look safe. He did not notice how carefully Aaliyah observed the shape of his comfort. The flight south was long enough for him to fall asleep halfway through, his head heavy on her shoulder. His breathing deepened, slow and unguarded. For a moment, Aaliyah allowed herself to look at him without the blur of ceremony, without the noise of guests and vows. In sleep, he looked younger, almost innocent. That was the cruelty of it. Betrayal rarely arrived wearing horns. It arrived wearing familiarity. It arrived with the face you had once trusted close to your mouth. Aaliyah stared out at the sky until it became nothing but endless blue. She did not move when his weight shifted. She held him steady, not out of love, but out of discipline. The plan required him rested, comfortable, certain. When they landed, heat rushed into the cabin like a hand pressed against skin. Thick, tropical, scented with salt and green sweetness. Belize welcomed them with bright light and lazy wind, the kind of place that promised you could forget the world if you tried hard enough. Ryan was delighted by it. A private driver met them beyond the crowds, taking their bags before they could touch them, ushering them toward a waiting car with chilled towels and bottled water. The road climbed slowly away from the airport, curving through palms and flowering trees, the ocean flashing in and out of sight like a secret. "This," Ryan said, leaning back satisfied, "is how you start a marriage." The resort was not a hotel so much as an illusion made physical. Wooden walkways suspended over greenery, villas tucked into privacy, lanterns lit like soft stars even in daylight. Their suite sat at the edge of a cliff, where the sea spread wide and glittering below them, as if offering itself for admiration. A staff member handed Ryan a welcome envelope and explained the details with professional warmth. Meals included, excursions available, a dedicated concierge. And then, almost casually, the final note: cell service is limited up here, sir, but the villa has a satellite line for emergencies, and the concierge can relay messages if needed. Ryan chuckled, pleased. Perfect, he said again. No one can reach us. Aaliyah's eyes remained on the horizon. Isolation, she thought, was never neutral. It was either chosen or imposed. For some, it was romance. For others, it was a cage. Inside the villa, everything was designed for a couple's softness. 2 robes hanging side by side, twin glasses on a tray, the bed dressed in pale linen that looked like clouds. Outside, an infinity pool stretched toward the edge of the cliff, water blending with sky until you could not tell where one ended and the other began. Ryan walked out onto the terrace and spread his arms as if claiming the view. "Can you believe this?" he said, laughing, the sound full and boyish. 2 weeks, just us. Aaliyah stepped beside him and let the breeze lift a strand of her hair. The sunset was slow, generous, gold melting into coral, then into a darker purple that felt almost intimate. The beauty was undeniable. It made the moment feel blessed. That was the trick of beautiful places. They made you think nothing ugly could happen there. Ryan slid an arm around her waist and kissed her temple with the ease of ownership. "I love you," he said, and he sounded sincere in the way people sound sincere when they believe their words cost them nothing. Aaliyah turned her face toward him, close enough to feel the warmth of his skin, close enough to let him believe in the story he was telling himself. "I know," she whispered, and while he smiled into her hair, convinced he had finally secured a life without interference, Aaliyah looked out at the endless water and felt the quiet certainty settle deeper. There were no crowds here, no witnesses, no one to interrupt. Only distance, only silence, only the perfect, deliberate isolation, prepared in advance like a stage. Ryan had chosen it for romance. Aaliyah understood it for what it truly was, the place where illusions went to die. The first night in Belize unfolded the way luxury is designed to, slowly, softly, without friction. The staff moved like shadows, present only in the perfection they left behind. A tray of fruit appeared on the table, as if the villa itself had conjured it. A bottle of chilled champagne waited in a silver bucket, beaded with condensation. The air smelled of jasmine and salt, and somewhere below the cliff the sea kept its steady rhythm, indifferent to vows, indifferent to grief. Ryan showered first, humming to himself, already relaxed into the pleasure of isolation. When he emerged, he looked younger again, barefoot, hair damp, the sharp edges of his wedding day polish replaced by ease. He wore linen like a man who believed comfort was proof that everything had gone according to plan. Aaliyah showered after him, slower, careful not to rush. Warm water slid down her shoulders, carrying away perfume and powder and the final traces of Charleston's applause. She pressed her palm to the tile wall and let herself breathe, deep and quiet, as if oxygen itself had become a discipline. When she stepped out, she wrapped herself in a robe the color of pale sand. In the mirror, her face looked calm. Too calm, some might have said. But calm was not emptiness. Calm was containment. Ryan poured champagne with the confidence of someone celebrating victory. "To us," he said, raising his glass. Aaliyah lifted hers, the crystal cool against her fingertips. The bubbles rose and burst at the surface like small, eager secrets. "To us," she echoed. They carried their glasses onto the terrace, where the last of the sunset still lingered, staining the sky with bruised pink and gold. The pool reflected it all, a flawless mirror that made the world look kinder than it was. Ryan stood behind her and kissed the top of her shoulder, lingering a little longer than necessary. "You were incredible today," he murmured. "Everybody saw it. They adore you." Adore. Another word that sounded like love without quite being love. Aaliyah smiled, not turning to face him. "It was beautiful," she said, and the sentence was true in the way poison can be sweet. They ate dinner outside, fresh seafood, citrus, herbs crushed into fragrance. Tiki torches swayed gently in the wind. Somewhere in the distance, laughter floated from another villa, a brief reminder that the world contained other couples, other stories still unbroken. Ryan spoke as they ate, his words smooth and eager. He talked about the next 5 years as if he could see them already. Promotions, partnerships, the possibility of a second home, the right schools, the right neighborhoods. He talked about children in the abstract, like a future investment, an inheritance of his name, his legacy. "We'll be a real team," he said, eyes bright, already imagining the photo of it. "You and me, we'll do it right." Aaliyah listened with the stillness of someone holding a glass too full. She nodded when it was expected. She laughed softly at his jokes. She let him build the dream aloud, brick by brick, while she watched for the places it cracked. There was a moment, small, almost invisible, when he reached across the table and touched her hand. Not possessively this time, gently, almost tender. "I can't believe I get to wake up next to you for the rest of my life," he said. The words landed differently than he intended. Aaliyah felt something in her chest tighten, not with longing, but with grief sharp enough to taste. Because once, long ago in the beginning of them, she would have believed him. Once, she would have let that sentence settle into her bones like a blessing. Once, she would have thought the future was something you built together, rather than something one person quietly planned around another. She held his gaze for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and in that heartbeat, she let herself mourn. Not him, not exactly. She mourned the version of herself who had wanted to be chosen by someone like Ryan. The version who had believed that being cherished was the same as being safe. The version who thought love could be negotiated into loyalty, the way contracts could be negotiated into fairness. That version was gone now. After dinner, Ryan opened another bottle, restless with celebration. He played music softly through the villa speakers, something slow and romantic with an easy chorus. He pulled her into his arms and swayed with her beneath the torches. "Mrs. Caldwell," he teased, voice warm with champagne and certainty. Aaliyah allowed herself to rest her cheek against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, steady, confident, unbothered by consequence. His hands moved along her back, as if memorizing the shape of ownership. She closed her eyes. For a few minutes, she let the world pretend, because pretending was part of the plan, because the trap required softness at the surface, because he needed to believe the illusion had followed them here, intact and unchallenged. Later in the bedroom, the air was cooler. The sheets were clean and white, folded with care like an offering. Ryan turned off the lights and slid into bed beside her, his body warm, familiar. He reached for her, fingers tracing her waist. "Best day of my life," he whispered into the dark, his voice thick with satisfaction. "I swear, I'm going to spend forever making you happy." Aaliyah did not pull away. She let him hold her. Not because she believed him, because she needed him unguarded, rested, whole, ready. She listened to his breathing slow. She felt his grip loosen as sleep claimed him quickly, as it often did when a man believed his world was secure. In the dark, Aaliyah stared at the ceiling where moonlight traced faint, shifting patterns. The verdict was not anger. It was not cruelty for its own sake. It was a decision shaped by days of restraint, by a lifetime of refusing to be made small, by the quiet understanding that some betrayals were not accidents, but architectures. Outside, the sea continued its steady pulse against the cliff. Inside, Ryan slept like a man who thought he had won. And Aaliyah lay awake, counting the hours until morning, until light, until clarity, until the moment when his perfect honeymoon would become the place where truth finally spoke. Dawn arrived with the soft authority of something inevitable. It did not burst into the room. It seeped in, threading pale light through the sheer curtains, turning the white linens to pearl, turning the air into a quiet, luminous promise. The villa still smelled faintly of jasmine and salt, and somewhere below the cliff, The ocean kept its steady rhythm, patient as a heartbeat. Aaliyah slipped out of bed without disturbing Ryan. He lay on his back, one arm flung carelessly across the pillow where her head had been, his mouth slightly parted in sleep. The man who could command boardrooms and charm strangers into agreement looked almost boyish in the early light, softened by rest, unguarded by reality. His confidence, so polished the night before, had melted into something ordinary. For a moment, Aaliyah watched him and felt the smallest tremor of sadness, not for what he would lose, but for what she had once hoped he could be. She remembered the beginning of them, the long conversations, the careful compliments, the way he'd looked at her as if he'd found something rare. Maybe he had. He simply hadn't known how to value it without trying to own it. Aaliyah moved into the bathroom and pulled on a robe, tying it at her waist with calm precision. She did not look at herself for long. She didn't need the mirror's permission. Her mind was already clear, her body following. She washed her face with cool water and let the shock of it sharpen her focus. On the dresser, her phone sat exactly where she'd left it. No messages, no missed calls. The world was still asleep. The timing was perfect. She stepped out onto the terrace. The air was cooler than it had been the day before, kissed by night and still holding the freshness of morning. The horizon glowed in layers, rose dissolving into gold, gold dissolving into the vast, unbroken blue. The infinity pool reflected it all like a flawless lie. Aaliyah rested her hands on the railing and breathed. She was not trembling. She was not furious. What filled her chest was something steadier than either, a resolve so quiet it felt almost sacred. She had spent the dark hours rehearsing nothing dramatic, no speeches, no cruelty dressed up as poetry, only the facts, arranged cleanly, like documents laid out on a table. Behind her, she heard movement. Ryan stirred, stretched, then called her name with the lazy satisfaction of a man waking inside his own dream. "Aaliyah," he said, voice husky with sleep, warm with possession. "Come back to bed." She did not move. Footsteps approached, bare against stone. He came out onto the terrace wearing swim trunks, hair still tousled, skin glowing with that particular ease men wear when they believe they are loved without conditions. He slid behind her, arms wrapping around her waist, and kissed the side of her neck. He sighed, looking out at the ocean. "This is the perfect start to our life." Aaliyah inhaled once, slowly, deliberately, then placed her hands over his and lifted them away from her body with gentle care. Not abrupt, not angry, simply final. Ryan chuckled softly, as if she were playing. "What's that?" he asked, smiling. "You're already acting mysterious." She turned to face him. The sunrise lit her features with a calm brilliance, and for a second he just looked, still confident, still certain he understood what he was seeing. Then his smile faltered, not because she frowned, but because she didn't. There was no warmth in her eyes, no invitation, no softness to negotiate with. "Aaliyah?" he said, the question quieting in his throat. "It is a perfect start," she agreed, her voice even, refined. "Just not the start you think it is." He blinked, confused. A flicker of irritation tried to form, restrained by his habit of charm. "Okay," he said, half laughing. "What does that mean?" Aaliyah walked to the small table beside the lounge chairs. Two champagne flutes still sat there from the night before, rinsed and polished, waiting like props left on a stage. She picked one up, then the other, holding them lightly, as if weighing something delicate. Ryan watched, amused again. "Are we doing another toast?" he asked. "Because I'm not saying no." Aaliyah set the glasses down. The sound was soft, but it landed like a gavel. "I know about Lena," she said. The words did not rise. They did not accuse. They simply existed, clean, undeniable. The ocean seemed to hush. Even the breeze felt as if it paused to listen. Ryan's face shifted in an instant, color draining so quickly it startled her, the confident mask slipping before he could catch it. His mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted, searching for the right expression, the right angle, the right lie that could restore control. "What?" he stammered. "What are you talking about? Who don't?" Aaliyah interrupted gently. That gentleness was the most terrifying part. She tilted her head, not in mockery, but in quiet disbelief, as if she were looking at a forgery that almost passed for real. "Don't insult me," she said. "Not this morning." Ryan swallowed hard. "Aaliyah, listen. I know about Lisbon," she continued, voice still calm. "I know about what you promised. I know the trip was booked before you ever said your vows." His breathing grew uneven. "No," he said, too quickly, too desperately. "That's not—" "It's exactly what it is," she corrected, her tone soft as velvet over steel. "It's not a mistake, it's a plan." Ryan stepped back as if the air had turned sharp. His gaze flicked to the villa behind them, to the ocean below, to the sky above, anywhere but her eyes. His mind was scrambling, trying to rebuild a world that had just cracked open. "How?" he whispered. "How did you—" Aaliyah's expression did not change. "That doesn't matter," she said. "What matters is that you did it." He looked at her then, truly looked, and panic tightened the corners of his face. "Why would you still marry me?" he asked, voice breaking on the question. "Why would you come here?" Aaliyah let a single breath pass through her nose, almost like sympathy. Almost. "Because," she said, stepping closer, "I wanted you awake when it happened." He stared at her, stunned, and in the bright, merciless beauty of that morning, beneath a sky painted like forgiveness, Aaliyah Monroe shifted the balance of their lives with one quiet sentence. Ryan Caldwell had arrived in paradise believing he was in control. But control had never been intelligence, and for the first time since he'd met her, he understood what it meant to face a woman who was no longer negotiating her own worth. For a few seconds after her words, Ryan simply stood there, as if the terrace had turned to glass beneath his feet. The sunrise kept blooming behind Aaliyah, soft gold spilling over her robe, turning her skin luminous, almost unreal. The ocean below continued its steady pulse, indifferent to the fracture unfolding above it. Everything in the world remained beautiful, and that beauty made what was happening feel even more merciless. Ryan's mouth opened, then closed again. He tried to speak, but the first sound that came out of him was not a sentence, just a thin breath, sharp with disbelief. "Aaliyah," he said finally, as if saying her name might anchor him back into the story he understood. You're misunderstanding." He reached for the old tools first, the ones that had always worked. Calm tone, reasonable face, a soft laugh, as if the truth could be gently corrected like a minor error. "Lisbon," he repeated, trying to make the word sound ridiculous. No, that's not what you think." Aaliyah did not answer. She did not argue. She looked at him with a stillness that left no room for negotiation. And that was when the panic began to rise in him, visible as weather. He took a step back, then another. His hand went to the back of his neck as if he could physically loosen the knot forming there. His eyes searched the terrace, the horizon, the villa, anything that might offer him an escape route that didn't exist. "How long?" he asked, voice dropping. "How long have you—" "I've known long enough," Aaliyah said quietly. Ryan's jaw tightened. He tried to pull himself upright, tried to rebuild the posture of a man in control. "Okay," he said, forcing steadiness. "Okay, let's talk about this like adults." He stepped toward her again, careful, like approaching something wild. His voice warmed, softened. "I can explain. You're still trying to manage me," she said, not accusing, simply observing. The sentence struck him like a slap, because it named him too precisely. Ryan blinked. "No, I'm trying to fix this." Aaliyah's expression didn't change, but something in her gaze sharpened. "You can't fix a plan," she replied. "You can only admit you made one." He swallowed hard. His lips parted as if to protest, but he couldn't find a lie that didn't collapse under its own weight. The truth was too clean, too documented, too obvious in the shape of his silence. "Listen," he said, voice rising now, the calm slipping. Whatever you saw, whatever you think you know, I don't think, Aaliyah interrupted. I know. The words were simple. They left him no anger. Ryan's composure cracked further. His breathing sped up. He ran a hand through his hair, dragging his fingers too hard, as if he could pull himself out of this moment by force. I made a mistake, he said quickly, desperate. A stupid mistake. It was stress. Everything was moving so fast and Aaliyah's head tilted slightly. Stress doesn't book flights, she said. Stress doesn't reserve a place for two. Ryan flinched. His eyes flashed with frustration. You're acting like I murdered someone. She held his gaze. You tried to steal my reality, she said softly. You married me while planning your exit. His face went pale again, the color draining as if the words had reached inside him and turned something off. He looked suddenly unsteady, as if he might sit down right there on the stone floor. No, he whispered, but the denial sounded weak even to him. Aaliyah took a slow step toward the villa, then turned back. The movement was unhurried, controlled, an elegance that made his unraveling look messy by contrast. Ryan followed her, voice sharpening. So what is this? He demanded. What are you doing? You came all the way here just to, what, punish me? Aaliyah paused. I came here, she said, because I refuse to be humiliated in silence. His eyes widened. Humiliated, he echoed, almost offended by the word. Aaliyah, come on. The privilege of his shock would have been funny if it hadn't been so ugly. You thought, she continued, that if you kept me smiling until the last guest left, until the last check cleared, until the last photo was taken, you could live two lives without consequence. Ryan's throat bobbed as he swallowed. His voice dropped, urgent now, pleading. Please, please don't do this here. We're married. We signed papers, Aaliyah corrected gently. That's not the same thing. The gentleness undid him. He stepped closer, hands lifting as if to touch her, to anchor her, to pull her back into the role he understood. Aaliyah, I love you, he said, and for a moment he even sounded like he believed it. Whatever happened, whatever I did, it doesn't erase that. Aaliyah looked at him then with something almost like pity. Love, she said, doesn't require secrecy. His eyes flicked away as if struck. His jaw tightened. And then the last of his composure snapped, because he could not charm his way out of being seen. You can't do this, he said, voice rising into a harsh edge. You can't just decide. Aaliyah's gaze held him in place. I can, she said, calm as morning light. Because you already did. He stared at her, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling like he was trying to outrun the truth inside his own body. For the first time, he looked genuinely frightened, not of losing her affection, but of losing the structure that had always protected him. Control. His eyes darted to the horizon again, to the beauty below, as if the ocean might take his side. Aaliyah, he whispered, voice breaking, please, what do you want? She did not answer with rage. She answered with finality. I want my life back, she said, and the words were so simple, so clean, that they left him with nothing to argue against. Ryan Caldwell had spent his life believing that if he controlled the moment, he controlled the outcome. He had never learned what happened when the moment belonged to someone else. And in that bright, flawless morning, surrounded by luxury designed for lovers, he began to understand a terrifying truth. The most devastating power was not loud. It did not beg. It did not explain. It simply moved on without him. Aaliyah did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She stepped inside the villa with the same measured grace she had carried down the aisle, as if the world had never asked her to perform anything she didn't choose. The cool air met her skin, scented faintly with citrus and polished wood. Behind her, Ryan remained on the terrace, silent for a beat too long, frozen in the place where his certainty had just died. The sound that followed was small, but unforgiving. A zipper. Aaliyah's suitcase had been half-packed since the night before. Not in panic, not in haste, but in calm preparation. Her blue carry-on, modest compared to the grandeur of the villa, stood waiting by the bedroom door like a quiet witness. Ryan burst through the sliding doors as if he could still arrive in time to stop the outcome. "Aaliyah, wait." His voice cracked on the word. "We have to talk. We have to." She did not turn right away. She folded a silk scarf with careful precision, placed it gently in the suitcase, then zipped the pocket closed. Each movement was deliberate, as if she were showing him something without stating it outright. This was not a reaction. This was a decision. Ryan stepped closer, breathing hard, the edges of him unraveling. "I don't understand," he said, the desperation turning his voice thin. "Why would you do this like this?" Here, Aaliyah finally faced him. In her robe and bare feet, she looked almost ethereal in the villa's soft morning light, calm, luminous, unbearably composed. But her expression held no softness for him now. Not cruelty either. Simply the clean line of a boundary drawn. "Because you planned to do it to me," she said quietly, just in a different direction. His eyes widened. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Aaliyah repeated, and the word landed gently, almost like a sigh. "Ryan, you were going to marry me in front of my family, accept their congratulations, accept their generosity, and then leave for a secret trip you already booked with another woman." He flinched, as if the truth was physically painful. He reached for her arm. Instinct, control, an old reflex. But she stepped back before his fingers could close around her. The movement so measured it felt like choreography. It wasn't fear that moved her away. It was refusal. Ryan's face tightened. "Okay," he said, forcing himself into a calmer tone. "Okay, fine. I messed up. I admit it. I did something stupid. But it doesn't have to be this." Aaliyah tilted her head slightly. "It already is." He stared at her, eyes wild now, searching for any crack he could slip through. "What do you want?" he demanded again, louder this time, as if volume could make the world return to the shape he preferred. "Money? Revenge? You want to embarrass me?" Aaliyah's gaze held him steady. "I want you to stop thinking my life is something you can negotiate," she said. "I want you to experience consequences without cushioning." Ryan's mouth opened, then closed. His chest rose and fell. "Consequences," he echoed, and for the first time the word sounded unfamiliar on his tongue. Aaliyah walked past him into the living area, where a small leather portfolio rested on the marble table. She opened it and removed a slim, black case. Inside was a secure drive, smooth, understated, almost elegant. She held it out between them. Ryan stared at it as if it might explode. "What is that?" he asked, voice hoarse. "Everything you need," Aaliyah replied. "The filing confirmation, the separation documents, the evidence trail, your instructions." His hand lifted slowly, reluctant, like someone touching something hot. "Filing?" he repeated. "Aaliyah, you can't have filed." "I can," she said, soft as velvet. And I did. His face went blank for a moment, as if his brain refused to translate the words into reality. "When?" he whispered. Aaliyah didn't answer with a date. She didn't have to. The certainty in her voice was enough. But she added, gently, because she wanted him to understand the shape of what he had underestimated. "You weren't blindsided," she said. "You were unprepared." Ryan's breathing became shallow. "This is insane," he muttered. "You're being strategic," Aaliyah finished for him, and her calmness made it sound like a virtue rather than a weapon. "Yes." He stepped back, shaking his head, a frantic laugh trying to surface. No, this is... Aaliyah, we're in a foreign country. We're married, we can't just..." "We were married," Aaliyah corrected, "because you wanted the optics. Now the optics belong to me." Ryan's eyes sharpened with sudden fear. "You're going to tell people." "I don't have to," she said. "The paperwork is public. The truth will travel on its own." His gaze flicked around the villa as if looking for an ally. There was none. The staff was invisible by design. The resort sat remote on a cliff. The signal was weak. The sky outside was painfully bright, and the world offered him nothing but beauty. Aaliyah lifted her suitcase and walked toward the front door. A soft chime sounded, the concierge message system, signaling a driver had arrived. Timing, always timing. Aaliyah reached for the handle, her movements unhurried. Ryan lunged forward. "No," he said, voice breaking. "You're not leaving. We need therapy. We need counseling. Aaliyah paused without turning, her hands still on the door. "Ryan," she said, quiet enough that he had to lean closer to hear. "I am not here to fix what you broke." He went still. She turned then, slowly, and for the first time there was a trace of emotion in her face. Not anger, not triumph, but something deeper. Something like sorrow sharpened into truth. "You thought I would shrink," she said softly. "You thought I would beg you to choose me again." Ryan's lips trembled. "Aaliyah, please." But she continued, voice steady. "You underestimated me because I loved you with grace. You mistook my tenderness for weakness, and that is the most expensive mistake you will ever make." She opened the door. Outside, the morning light spilled in, fresh and merciless. A driver stood waiting with professional courtesy, holding a small sign with her married name. The irony might have been cruel if it hadn't been so perfect. Aaliyah stepped out. The driver reached for her suitcase, and she let him take it without looking back. Ryan followed to the threshold, his face a portrait of disbelief, panic, and the dawning horror of a man realizing the world will not bend simply because he asks it to. "Aaliyah," he called, voice raw. "If you walk away, you destroy everything." She stopped, just once, still framed by sunlight. Not because she doubted herself, but because she wanted her final words to land cleanly. "No," she said, turning her head slightly so he could see her profile, calm as a statue. "You destroyed everything the moment you decided I didn't deserve the truth." Then she walked down the path toward the waiting car, her robe moving softly in the breeze, her posture unbroken. Ryan stood in the doorway of the villa, surrounded by luxury meant for two, holding a secure drive like a verdict, watching the woman he had underestimated disappear into the morning. And only then did he begin to understand what it truly cost to confuse a woman's grace for permission. The first hours after Aaliyah left were quiet in the way a catastrophe is quiet at the beginning, before it finds its witnesses. Ryan stayed in the villa like a man stranded inside a painting. The sea below was too blue, the sky too generous. Everything outside the glass doors remained serenely indifferent, and the indifference felt like cruelty. He paced the marble floors barefoot, his footsteps too loud in a space designed for softness. He touched objects without meaning to, an untouched fruit bowl, a folded robe, the champagne bucket still sweating cold on the counter, as if proof of normal life might restore his. He called her phone, straight to voicemail. He called again, then again, the same hollow answer, returning like an echo. When the third call failed, he threw his phone onto the couch and stared at it as if it had betrayed him too. He remembered, too late, what he had loved about this place, the distance from everything. He remembered how pleased he'd been when the concierge mentioned limited reception. No interruptions, he'd said. No noise. Now the silence was not romance. It was punishment. The satellite line sat on the wall, a polished device meant for emergencies and the occasional indulgent call home. Ryan grabbed it with trembling fingers and dialed his attorney in New York. A ring. Another. Then voicemail, calm and infuriating. "Office hours. Leave a message. Someone will return your call." His breath came faster. He dialed again, as if persistence could override the laws of time zones. When that failed, he called his mother. No answer. Then a friend. Then another. Each unanswered ring tightened something in his chest. He could feel the world moving without him, closing doors, locking narratives, choosing sides before he could even speak. Finally, in a surge of desperation, he dialed the only person he knew would answer quickly. Lena. She picked up on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep and confusion. "Ryan? What's wrong? Are you okay?" He swallowed hard, trying to compress panic into something coherent. She knows, he said. Aaliyah knows. She left. She filed. There was a pause so long it felt like the line had gone dead. Then Lena inhaled sharply. How? I don't know, Ryan hissed, the words tearing out of him. She just said it, like she'd been waiting, like she'd planned it. Lena's voice shifted, waking fully, sharpening. Where are you? In the villa, he said, almost angry at the question. She left me here. Another pause. Ryan, Lena said, and there was something careful in her tone now, something professional sliding back into place, like armor. You need a lawyer. You need to look at whatever she gave you. And you need to stop talking to me on a recorded line. Recorded line. The phrase struck him strangely, because it was the first time he realized she was already thinking about liability, about survival, about herself. I don't care about recorded lines, he snapped. I need help. Lena exhaled. I can't help you like that, she said, softer now, but firm. This is serious. The call ended with no comfort, only a cold awareness. Even his accomplice had instincts for self-preservation. Ryan stood in the middle of the villa, the phone in his hand, and understood a brutal truth. He was alone in a place built for togetherness. At some point, he opened the secure drive. His laptop chimed, recognizing the device, and a folder appeared, neatly labeled with his name and hers. Clean, formal, almost elegant. Inside were documents that looked like the future, arranged into files. Petitions, agreements, exhibits. He clicked the evidence first because pain, at least, was familiar. There it was, screenshots, timestamps, a trail that didn't merely imply betrayal, but proved planning. It was all laid out with the clinical beauty of a well-curated archive. Aaliyah had not just discovered him, she had documented him. Ryan's stomach turned. He clicked the filing confirmation next, and his vision blurred as he read it. Date, time, jurisdiction. The stamp of inevitability. She hadn't threatened him. She had moved without him. By afternoon, the resort staff knew something had happened, though they asked nothing. Their politeness became another layer of humiliation, trained discretion that felt like pity. The chef arrived with lunch and addressed him with careful respect. Mr. Caldwell, he said quietly, as if speaking too loudly might crack him further. Ryan nodded without tasting anything. He spent the remainder of the day trying to escape the island on the phone, bargaining with airlines, offering money to charter companies, pleading with concierge services. Each conversation ended the same way. Nothing available, nothing immediate, nothing that restored his control. As the sun began to set again, he finally caught a signal strong enough for his phone to reconnect. And the world rushed in. Notifications hit like hail. Missed calls, texts from friends that began with disbelief and ended with accusation. Emails from colleagues, mentions on social media. The gossip had found oxygen. The first headline wasn't even subtle. A screenshot of him leaving the airport in Belize, captured somehow, posted somewhere, paired with a caption that made his skin go cold. Newlywed files for divorce. Less than 24 hours after wedding. Honeymoon disaster in Belize. The story had already been shaped, and it wasn't shaped in his favor. He called his attorney again, now with a signal and a fury that sounded like dignity from far away. This time the call went through. The voice on the other end was sharp, rushed, already strained. Ryan, the attorney said, not bothering with greeting. Where the hell are you? I'm trying to get back, Ryan snapped. Tell me what's happening. How is this public already? A short, humorless laugh. Because filings don't stay private, and because someone leaked enough context to make it irresistible. The narrative's moving fast. Narrative. Ryan hated the word because it sounded like something he could usually manage. What narrative? He demanded. The attorney's voice lowered, turning grim. That you committed fraud. That you married her for optics while planning an affair. That she protected herself. that you're the villain. Ryan closed his eyes as if darkness could block the truth. I can fix it, he insisted. I can explain. You don't have time for explanations, the attorney cut in. You have hearings. You have documents you signed and didn't read. And you have a wife who played this like a long game. The call ended with instructions, court dates, immediate steps, warnings. When Ryan lowered the phone, his hands were shaking. Outside, the sky was turning violet. The ocean was still beautiful. The villa lights warmed the terrace like a romantic invitation. And Ryan, once so sure of his power, stood in paradise watching the world decide what he was, without asking his permission. He had wanted control. Instead, he got consequence. Because once a narrative turns public, it stops belonging to the person who caused it and starts belonging to everyone who witnessed it. And Ryan Caldwell, in less than a day, had become a story people loved to repeat. Cleanly packaged, easily understood, impossible to deny. Aaliyah had known this. That was why she chose timing. That was why she chose silence. And that was why the world, hungry for justice, dressed in elegance, carried her version of the truth like a flame. Freedom did not arrive with cheers. It arrived quietly, like a tide pulling back from shore. Weeks later, in a city that knew nothing of her wedding colors or the sound of vows dissolving, Aaliyah sat at a small cafe where the tables leaned toward the sun. The light here was different, less theatrical, more honest. It did not ask her to perform. It simply warmed the page of the book resting open in her hands, the steam lifting from her cup, the breath she took without checking who might be watching. She had learned something important in the days after leaving Belize. Endings do not need witnesses to be real. They need integrity. The world, of course, had spoken. Stories traveled the way they always do, trimmed of nuance, hungry for spectacle. There were headlines, whispers, judgments made by people who mistook volume for truth. Aaliyah read none of it. Silence, she discovered, was not avoidance. It was selection. She chose what deserved her attention and let the rest fall away. What remained was space. Space to wake without bracing. Space to make decisions unshaped by compromise. Space to remember that love, when it is worthy, does not require you to shrink so someone else can stand taller. On mornings when doubt tried to return, when memory reached for her with familiar hands, she answered it with the facts she trusted. She had protected herself without becoming cruel, told the truth without begging it to be believed, and left without dragging her dignity behind her like luggage. She thought, sometimes, of the woman she had been at the beginning of the story, the one who believed patience alone could teach a man how to be faithful. She did not scold that woman, she honored her. Growth did not mean erasing the past. It meant releasing it. Aaliyah closed her book and watched the street pass. Ordinary, beautiful, unconcerned. Somewhere behind her, applause might have been possible. Validation could have been chased. But applause fades and freedom endures. She paid her bill, stood, and stepped back into the afternoon with the unhurried confidence of someone who had chosen herself completely. No spectacle, no victory speech, just a life reclaimed, lived forward. And if this story stayed with you, if it stirred a thought, or reminded you of a moment when timing mattered more than noise, carry it with you. Share what it meant in your own words, and follow along for the next chapter. Some truths don't shout, they wait to be recognized.